A katana blade slices through a 5 centimeter thick bamboo pole. Clean. Effortless. Like cutting through warm butter. The master swordsmith doesn't stop. He repositions the blade and cuts through 6 rolled tatami mats soaked in water, each one replicating the density of human muscle and bone. The blade passes through all 6 without hesitation. He holds up the katana to the light, examining the edge under a magnifying glass. Not a single chip. Not even a microscopic imperfection. The edge remains razor-sharp, gleaming like polished glass. You're watching the result of 3 months of intensive labor, 7 different master craftsmen, and a tradition that dates back over 700 years. That katana you just saw? It can cost up to $200,000. And after what you're about to learn, you'll understand exactly why. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, because I'm going to take you inside the most secretive and demanding sword-making process in human history. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see Japanese craftsmanship and the ancient art of metallurgy. The story of the katana begins in the 13th century. During Japan's feudal era, samurai warriors needed weapons that could deliver devastating cutting power while remaining light enough for quick, precise strikes. But here's what most people don't know. The secret to a katana's legendary sharpness doesn't start in a forge. It starts in a riverbed, hundreds of miles away from any workshop, where workers spend weeks collecting something that looks like ordinary black sand. This isn't regular sand. It's called satetsu, iron sand, and it contains magnetite, a form of iron oxide that's been naturally refined by centuries of erosion. Workers wade through shallow rivers in remote regions of Japan, particularly in the Shimane and Okayama prefectures, scooping this heavy, dark sand into bamboo baskets. They process tons of riverbed material to collect just a few hundred kilograms of usable iron sand. The sand gets passed over powerful magnets to separate the iron-rich particles from regular silica. Then it's graded by density and purity. Only the finest grade, with iron content above 70%, makes it to the next stage. That next stage is where things get truly extraordinary. The iron sand travels to one of only a handful of traditional Tatara furnaces still operating in Japan. These aren't your modern industrial blast furnaces. A Tatara is a massive clay structure, roughly 3 meters tall and 4 meters wide, built by hand using specific ratios of clay, sand, and rice straw. The construction alone takes experienced workers 2 weeks to complete. The furnace runs on charcoal, not coal or coke. We're talking about specially selected pine charcoal, cut from trees at least 80 years old, burned at controlled temperatures to achieve the perfect carbon content. At 4 o'clock in the morning on the first day of the smelt, the fire master, called a murage, lights the furnace. His title isn't just ceremonial. He's the one person responsible for the entire operation, and if he makes a mistake, 3 days of work and tens of thousands of dollars worth of materials are ruined. The temperature inside the furnace climbs slowly, carefully, reaching 1,500 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt copper, hot enough to turn sand into glass. But the murage isn't melting the iron, he's reducing it, using a chemical process where carbon from the charcoal strips oxygen away from the iron oxide, leaving behind pure metallic iron. Here's where the real skill comes in. Over the next 72 hours, workers feed alternating layers of iron, sand, and charcoal into the top of the furnace, every 30 minutes, day and night, without pause. The murage monitors the furnace constantly, watching the color of the flames, listening to the sound of the fire, even smelling the smoke. He adjusts airflow through underground bellows, controlling oxygen levels with incredible precision. Too much oxygen and the iron oxidizes, turning to worthless slag. Too little and the reduction process stalls. The margin for error is almost zero. On the third day, 72 hours after the furnace was lit, the murage gives the order to break open the clay walls. Workers carefully dismantle the structure, revealing a massive bloom of steel at the bottom, still glowing orange and radiating heat that you can feel from 10 feet away. This bloom weighs about 2 tons, but here's the thing. Most of it is useless slag, impurities, waste material. The murage and his team carefully break apart the bloom using hammers and chisels, examining each piece, looking for the treasure hidden inside. What they're searching for is called Tamahagane, jewel steel. It appears as irregular chunks of steel with a distinctive silver-blue luster, almost like frozen mercury. Out of 2 tons of material, they might recover only 200 kilograms of true Tamahagane, sometimes less. Each piece gets inspected individually, They're looking for specific characteristics: the right color, the right crystalline structure, the right sound when struck with a hammer. Experienced workers can identify quality Tamahagane just by looking at the fracture pattern when a piece is broken. This steel contains between 0.6 and 1.5% carbon. That precise range is critical. Any higher and the steel becomes too brittle. Any lower and it won't hold an edge. The Tamahagane gets sorted into two categories: high carbon steel, which is harder and holds a sharper edge, and low carbon steel, which is softer but more flexible and resistant to breaking. A master swordsmith needs both types to create a katana with the perfect balance of sharpness and durability. The high carbon steel will form the outer shell and cutting edge. The low carbon steel will form the inner core, providing flexibility and shock absorption. And this is just the raw material. We haven't even started making the sword yet. The steel you're looking at right now, these chunks of Tamahagane that took 3 days and tremendous skill to produce, they're about to go through a transformation process so demanding, so precise, that only a few hundred people on Earth are qualified to do it. In the next part of this journey, you'll see how master swordsmiths take this raw steel and forge it into 32,768 individual layers, creating a blade structure that modern metallurgy still struggles to replicate. The swordsmith's workshop is quiet except for the rhythmic clang of hammer on steel. It's 5:30 in the morning, and the master has already been working for an hour. In front of him sits roughly 3 kilograms of Tamahagane, sorted into 2 distinct piles. The high-carbon pieces on the left, darker with a bluish tint. The low-carbon pieces on the right, slightly lighter in color with a softer sheen. This steel is about to undergo a process called kite, folding and forging. And it's the reason a katana can slice through bamboo like paper while remaining virtually indestructible. The swordsmith places several pieces of high-carbon Tamahagane into a small clay crucible, stacking them carefully. He wraps the bundle with rice paper that's been soaked in a mixture of clay and water, then wires it together. This package goes into a traditional charcoal forge, where temperatures reach 1,300 degrees Celsius. The rice paper burns away almost immediately, but not before the clay coating protects the steel from oxidizing. After about 20 minutes, the steel reaches a bright yellow-white heat. The swordsmith pulls it out with long tongs and places it on his anvil. Now comes the first fold. Using a heavy hammer, he strikes the glowing steel repeatedly, flattening it into a rectangular bar about 30 centimeters long and 3 centimeters thick. The hammer blows aren't random. The murage monitors the furnace constantly, watching the color of the flames, listening to the sound of the fire, even smelling the smoke. He adjusts airflow through underground bellows, controlling oxygen levels with incredible precision. Too much oxygen and the iron oxidizes, turning to worthless slag. Too little and the reduction process stalls. The margin for error is almost zero. Back to the anvil. Hammer blows rain down, flattening the folded bar back into a single layer. Then it's cut and folded again, and again, and again. This process repeats 15 times. Let me put that in perspective. After the first fold, you have 2 layers. After the second fold, 4 layers. After the third, 8. By the time the swordsmith completes the 15th fold, that bar of steel contains 32,768 individual layers. Each layer is thinner than a human hair. You can't see them with the naked eye, but they're there. And they're the reason this blade will achieve an edge geometry impossible with regular steel. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The swordsmith performs this entire process twice. Once with the high-carbon Tamahagane, creating the hard outer shell called kawagane, and once with the low-carbon Tamahagane, creating the soft inner core called shingane. Each folding process takes an entire day. The swordsmith can only work while the forge maintains consistent temperature, and every heat cycle risks introducing flaws. A single cold shut, where metal doesn't properly weld during folding, can ruin the entire block and force him to start over. After 2 days of folding, the swordsmith has 2 separate bars of layered steel, the hard kawagane and the soft shingane. Now he has to combine them in a way that creates the katana's unique structural properties. He shapes the soft shingane into a U-shaped channel, like a trough. Then, he heats both pieces to welding temperature and places the hard kawagane bar inside this channel. So the soft steel wraps around 3 sides of the hard steel. More hammerwork welds them together into a single composite bar with hard steel on the outside and soft steel protected in the core. This composite structure is brilliant engineering. The hard outer layer, with its high carbon content, can be sharpened to an incredibly acute angle and will hold that edge through repeated cutting. But hard steel is brittle. If the entire blade was made from high-carbon steel, it would shatter on impact. The soft inner core solves this problem. It absorbs shock, flexing slightly under stress, preventing catastrophic failure. The katana can bend up to 15 degrees without taking a permanent set and still return to true. Try that with a regular carbon steel blade and it'll snap in half. The swordsmith now begins shaping the blade. He heats the composite bar and uses careful hammer strikes to draw it out, lengthening it, thinning it, forming the characteristic gentle curve and tapered profile. A finished katana blade is typically 70 to 90 centimeters long from tip to tang. The spine, called the mune, is about 6 millimeters thick at the base. The edge bevel, called the shinogi, is less than 1 millimeter. Every dimension matters. The blade has to be long enough for effective cutting, light enough for quick handling, and balanced so the center of percussion falls about 20 centimeters from the tip. This shaping process takes another full day. The blade gets reheated dozens of times, forged carefully from both sides, constantly measured and checked for straightness. The swordsmith works mostly by eye and feel, using tools that haven't changed in centuries. A slight miscalculation in hammer placement, too much force on one side, and the blade develops an unwanted warp that can't be corrected. Once the basic shape is complete, the swordsmith performs one of the most critical and dangerous steps in the entire process. He prepares a special clay mixture using river clay, charcoal powder, and ground whetstones, mixed with water to a consistency like thick paint. He applies this clay to the blade in a very specific pattern. The back and sides of the blade get a thick coating, about 2 to 3 millimeters. But the edge, the part that will do the cutting, receives only a very thin coat, less than half a millimeter, or sometimes no clay at all. The blade goes into the forge one last time. The swordsmith watches the color carefully as temperature rises. He's looking for a specific shade of orange, almost like the color of the moon on a summer evening. That's about 750 degrees Celsius. When the color is perfect, he pulls the blade out and in one smooth, decisive motion, plunges it edge down into a trough of water. This is called yaki-ire, the quench, and it's the moment where years of work can be destroyed in 2 seconds. The water hits the superheated steel and the edge cools almost instantaneously, dropping 600 degrees in less than a second. This rapid cooling transforms the crystal structure of the steel from austenite to martensite, creating a hardness of about 60 on the Rockwell C scale. That's harder than most industrial drill bits. But here's the crucial part. The thick clay on the spine insulates that portion of the blade, so it cools much more slowly, retaining a softer, more flexible structure. The differential hardening creates different crystalline structures in different parts of the same piece of steel. And this is where something beautiful happens. The edge, now extremely hard, contracts more than the softer spine. This differential contraction causes the blade to curve naturally, creating the katana's distinctive gentle arc. The swordsmith didn't bend the blade into this curve. The curve created itself through the laws of physics and metallurgy. And if you look closely at the boundary between the hard edge and the soft spine, you'll see a hazy white line called the hamon. This isn't decoration. It's a visible record of the heat treatment, proof that the blade has been properly quenched and hardened. The swordsmith pulls the blade from the water and examines it in the firelight. He's looking for cracks, checking the curve, studying the hamon pattern. If everything is perfect, he sets it aside to cool slowly overnight. Tomorrow, the blade will go to the polisher, and that's where its true sharpness will finally be revealed. The blade that comes out of the swordsmith's workshop looks nothing like the mirror-polished katana you see in museums. It's covered in black scale, oxidation from repeated heating. The edge is dull. You couldn't cut paper with it. This is where the togishi, the master polisher, takes over. And what he does over the next 120 to 200 hours will determine whether this blade becomes a cutting instrument of legendary sharpness or just an expensive piece of metal. The polisher starts with rough stones, coarse water stones around 220 grit, used with water as lubricant. He works the entire blade systematically, removing the scale, revealing the steel underneath. The strokes are long and deliberate, always following the curve of the blade, maintaining consistent pressure. After several hours with the coarse stone, he moves to 400 grit, then 800, then 1000. Each stone removes the scratches left by the previous stone, creating progressively finer scratches until the surface begins to develop a subtle sheen. But the real work starts with the finishing stones. These are natural water stones from specific quarries in Japan, some of which have been closed for over 50 years, making the remaining stones incredibly valuable. We're talking about stones worth $3,000 to $10,000 each. The polisher uses 8 to 12 different finishing stones, each one creating a specific effect on different parts of the blade. The shinogi, that ridge line running down the blade, gets polished with one type of stone. The flat surface gets another. The edge gets treated with the finest stones, sometimes exceeding 8,000 grit. Here's what most people don't understand. The polisher isn't just making the blade shiny. He's creating the final edge geometry. The angle of the bevel, the way light reflects off the surface, the microscopic structure of the cutting edge itself. All of this is controlled by his hands. The pressure he applies, the angle of the stone, the number of strokes. He works under bright lights with magnifying glasses, examining every millimeter of the blade for imperfections. A skilled Tagishi can see flaws in the steel that are invisible to untrained eyes. Inclusions, areas where the folding didn't weld properly, stress points that could develop into cracks. The final polishing creates an edge that measures between 0.3 and 0.5 millimeters thick at the very apex. That's sharper than most surgical scalpels. The edge is so acute that it can shave hair off your arm without any pressure, just dragging the blade across your skin. And because of the hard martensitic structure from the differential hardening, this edge will maintain its sharpness through hundreds of cuts. The polisher also brings out the hamon, that wavy line between hard and soft steel. He uses a special technique called hadori, selectively polishing areas to create contrast, making the hamon appear as a bright, misty line against the darker steel. While the blade is being polished, other craftsmen are creating the mounting. The handle, called the tsuka, starts as 2 halves of magnolia wood, carved to fit the tang perfectly. The wood gets wrapped with samigawa, ray skin, which has a naturally rough texture. Then it's bound with tsuka ito, silk or cotton cord, wrapped in a precise diamond pattern that takes about 3 hours to complete correctly. The wrapping isn't decorative. It provides grip and structural reinforcement. The tsuba, the handguard, is forged separately from iron or copper alloy. A master tsuba maker can spend 30 hours creating a single piece, carving intricate designs, inlaying precious metals, creating tiny perforations that serve both aesthetic and functional purposes. Some antique tsuba are considered works of art in their own right and sell for over $50,000. When all the components are finished, the sword is assembled. But before it's sold or displayed, it goes through final testing. The swordsmith, or a testing specialist, takes the blade and performs Tamahagane, test cutting. This isn't ceremonial, it's quality control. The blade cuts through bundled bamboo, through the rolled tatami mats we saw at the beginning, sometimes through suspended bamboo stems with a single draw cut. After each series of cuts, the edge is examined under magnification. Any chips, any rolling of the edge, any imperfection means the blade failed the test. A properly made katana will cut through all these materials cleanly, leaving smooth surfaces on the cut edges. The blade should show no damage. Remember those 6 tatami mats from the opening? Each one replicates the density of human tissue. Cutting through 6 consecutively requires a blade hardness of at least 58 Rockwell C, an edge angle under 20 degrees, and perfect geometry from tip to tang. Less than 10% of traditionally made katanas achieve this level of performance on first testing. Each licensed smith can produce a maximum of 24 blades per year. That's it. The government restricts production to maintain quality and preserve traditional methods. Export regulations are equally strict. Taking a katana out of Japan requires registration, authentication papers, and approval from the Agency for Cultural Affairs. Some historically significant blades are designated as national treasures and cannot leave the country under any circumstances. Each licensed smith can produce a maximum of 24 blades per year. That's it. The government restricts production to maintain quality and preserve traditional methods. Export regulations are equally strict. Taking a katana out of Japan requires registration, authentication papers, and approval from the Agency for Cultural Affairs. Some historically significant blades are designated as national treasures and cannot leave the country under any circumstances. The few antique blades that do reach international markets command premium prices from collectors who understand what they're acquiring. Not just a sword, a functional work of art that represents over 700 years of metallurgical knowledge passed down through generations of master craftsmen. So, the next time you see a katana cutting through bamboo like it's nothing, you'll know exactly what you're looking at. 3 months of intensive labor, 7 different master craftsmen, 32,768 layers of folded steel, 120 hours of hand polishing, and a tradition so demanding that only a few hundred people on Earth are qualified to continue it. That's why the edge stays sharp. That's why the blade doesn't break. And that's why these swords cost more than most people's cars. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the world's most demanding manufacturing processes, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more factory tours and traditional craft documentaries coming that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.